Hi, I'm Rowena, and I was the daughter who paid their bills in silence, until the night they called me a leech. At their dinner table, in front of the whole family. They said I didn't matter, that I was just floating through life, handing out money like it bought me a seat at the table. But I wasn't even on the guest list. Not for that night. Not for the years I paid their mortgage. Not when they transferred my property behind my back. They didn't forget me. They erased me. And when I finally stopped paying, what happened next was never about money. It was about power. And what happens when you take it back? Why would a daughter give up her entire inheritance and feel like she finally won? When I pulled into the driveway of my parents' home in Boise, the front porch light flickered like it always had. A tiny, stubborn beacon in a house that hadn't felt like mine in years. I sat in my car a moment longer than necessary, my fingers drumming the steering wheel, rehearsing the neutral smile I knew I'd need the second I stepped inside. Success, they say, doesn't always buy you peace. And mine certainly hadn't bought me a warmer welcome. The house looked smaller than I remembered, more dated too, but it still held that carefully preserved air of superiority that my mother had spent decades perfecting. When I rang the doorbell, Valora opened the door with a half smile that didn't touch her eyes. She leaned in, placing both hands stiffly on my shoulders, then patted twice before pulling away. "You look well," I said, stepping inside. She didn't answer, just called over her shoulder, "Callista, your sister's here," before turning and disappearing into the hallway. I swallowed the instinct to laugh. You'd think after all these years, after all the checks and support, and holding it together when no one else would, she might ask how I'd been, or at least pretend. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon air freshener and reheated pot roast. It hit me how nothing really changes here, except where I'm allowed to stand. Everyone was already seated at the dining table. The spot next to my father, where I used to sit before my seat was reassigned without notice, was now Callista's domain, complete with her daughter's artwork pinned to the sideboard behind her. The only seat left for me was tucked at the far end of the table, directly next to the bathroom door. The chair was lower than the rest, wobbly and angled away from the center, like it had been pulled in as an afterthought. I pulled it out slowly, sat down without a word, and adjusted the cushion that was half slipping off. Overhead, the light bulb buzzed and flickered, casting uneven shadows across my plate. "You're early," Callista said, her tone a mix of surprise and warning. "I figured it's polite to be on time when you're a guest," I replied, then bit down on the last word before it could cut too deep. From my new angle, I could barely see half the table. Plates clinked, hands passed dishes, and laughter floated past me like I was listening through glass. Someone made a joke about Elowen's violin recital. I smiled. I'd heard about it secondhand, from a friend of a friend who follows Callista's Facebook page. "So, how's Austin?" my father asked, glancing at me over his glasses. "It's been good," I said. "We're breaking ground on a new community center this fall. Green certified design, lots of solar. Should be one of the first of its kind in the district." A short silence followed. My mother lifted her glass, took a sip of white wine, and smoothly changed the topic. "Callista's been so busy, between Elowen's music lessons and keeping up with Simeon's business trips. It's a wonder she manages everything so gracefully." I set down my fork. Of course, because raising a child and smiling through luncheons is the pinnacle of achievement, while building spaces that serve hundreds somehow doesn't quite measure up. Success, I've learned, only counts when it fits the family's version of respectable. I scanned the walls, photos of Callista's wedding, Elowane's birthday, Christmas mornings I wasn't invited to. There wasn't a single picture of me past age 25. Maybe they got tired of explaining who I was. Maybe they stopped remembering. They still think I'm the flaky one, I thought, watching Valora refill Callista's glass like muscle memory. The dreamer. The one who left. It didn't matter that I'd sent money every month without fail for almost 2 years, or that I'd covered hospital bills when Dad had that scare in 2019. None of that makes you visible if they don't want to see you. And maybe that's the point. This isn't dinner, it's a reenactment. Everyone plays their part. The proud father, the sacrificial mother, the perfect daughter. Me? I'm the cautionary tale. Just as Valora set down a steaming dish of green beans, she looked my way, like she just remembered I was there. "I'm glad you could join us tonight, Rowena," she said, her voice sugary but stiff. "We never know when you'll blow in from your busy life." The air in the room shifted. I felt every eye swing toward me, not with curiosity but expectation. I gripped my fork a little tighter, my knuckles whitening beneath the table. The scent of overcooked onions wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the faint spray of citrus disinfectant each time the bathroom door swung open behind me. From my far corner at the dining table, I tried to follow the conversation floating through clinks of silverware, but it felt like I was dialing into a family broadcast from another room. The chair beneath me creaked every time I shifted my weight, and the flickering light above me gave off the kind of dull buzz you don't notice until it's the only sound trying to fill the void. They talked about the drought, the price of eggs, Elowyn's piano teacher's divorce. I nodded where appropriate. When a lull hit, Gordon turned his attention my way, with the kind of grin you give someone when you're about to deliver a punchline you think they can't dodge. "So, Ro," he started, voice casual like he was just warming up. "What's the latest on your big city project? You're still doing that? What is it? Eco-build stuff?" Before I could respond, Valora leaned in just enough to let her voice carry. "Honestly, we don't even know what she does anymore," she said, eyes still on her plate. "She just floats around from city to city like she's somebody." Callista gave a sharp laugh, almost a cough, and added, "It's cute, really." Then Gordon chuckled. This low, dry sound, like he was about to say something wise. "You're kind of a leech, sweetie. We just don't say it out loud, usually." The room fell into a silence so still, you could have heard the condensation drip from my water glass. Elowyn stirred her drink slowly. Malus looked down, chewing longer than needed. I stayed quiet, stared at the wood grain of the table, tracing its lines with my eyes like they might lead somewhere else. I didn't flinch. Not externally, but I felt something shift under my skin. I used to think words like that could only come from outsiders, I thought. Turns out, it cuts deeper when it's from people who once read you bedtime stories. I tightened my grip on my fork, knuckles pale, breath measured. My throat burned, but I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me blink faster. I'd mastered that part. Gordon poured himself more wine like nothing had happened. "Let's not make it awkward," he said, swirling the glass. "She sends some money sometimes, but come on, how much is it really helping?" Callista jumped in without missing a beat. "Exactly. Mom and Dad worked their whole lives. She's just playing catch-up now." Valora smiled like she was in on a joke everyone else had rehearsed. "We never asked for it. She just likes to feel important." I wanted to stand, throw something, scream. But instead, I let their voices play out like background static while my mind did math. $4,000 a month. 2 years? No missed payments, no questions asked. I'd covered their mortgage, a new water heater, even Elowyn's braces deposit. But apparently, that was just me trying to feel important. "You act like the money flows like water," I said silently. "Like it wasn't scraped together from long hours and sleepless nights. Like I didn't choose to give you comfort instead of buying my own." I clenched my jaw and smiled. Because that's what you do when the people who owe you the most pretend they never asked. Beside me, Elowyn placed a folded napkin on my side of the plate. No words, just a small, steady movement. I glanced at her, and for a split second, our eyes met. That's when I stood up and collected the empty plates. "I'll help clear," I offered, my voice even. Valora didn't protest. She never did when I acted useful. I walked into the kitchen, hands steady enough to carry porcelain, but only just. I reached for the faucet to rinse, but paused. I wasn't rinsing dishes. I was rewriting the script. As I wiped a clean plate, one that barely held food because I'd lost my appetite 2 insults ago, I heard Gordon's voice drift in from the dining room. "Bring dessert when you're done playing martyr." My hands froze. It wasn't the first time they'd tried to reduce me, but that word, martyr, hit differently. That word was a closing statement, not the insult, not the laughter. That word was the kill shot. I didn't slam the plate. I placed it down gently, because the war wasn't going to be loud. Mourning in my parents' house doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like a routine I forgot how to perform. I woke up early, not by design, but by the kind of restlessness that comes after you've been bruised in a room full of people who claim to love you. The hallway was quiet, except for the sound of dishes being moved, soft ceramic tapping against granite. Valora stood in the kitchen, back turned, pouring coffee. She didn't acknowledge me as I passed. No nod, no good morning. Just the sound of a cabinet shutting with finality. I took my mug to the front window, the one that still had a smudge from when Elowen pressed her face against it years ago. I sat where the light hit just right and let the silence wrap around me. Sip by sip, I tried to untangle the knot from last night, but it sat stubborn in my chest. And just like that, the memory came, uninvited but familiar. My high school graduation. I remember the sound of my name echoing through the outdoor stadium, the applause reserved for others, never arriving for me. Everyone around me was met with camera flashes and bouquets. I walked the stage and looked for their faces in the crowd, but the seats were empty. They probably got stuck in traffic, I told myself at the time. Or maybe they thought it was at a different campus. I remember manufacturing those excuses like a factory line, excuse after excuse, polished and packaged, to protect myself. When someone is absent long enough, you stop waiting. Then you start rationalizing. Because to admit the truth would be unbearable. I sat alone in the courtyard after the ceremony, diploma folder on my lap, watching other parents take photos, hug their kids, fuss over gowns and future plans. Mine weren't late. They simply didn't come. That day, I learned how to shrink my wins into something less noticeable, more tolerable. I thought if I didn't make a big deal of anything, it wouldn't hurt as much when no one else did either. A knock on the screen door pulled me back to the present. "Brought apples," Malis said, stepping inside with a reusable bag. "I forgot how sweet these get up here." She set them on the counter and helped herself to a glass of water. We didn't talk about last night right away. That was her way. Casual first, then truth in increments. As we walked past the hallway toward the back patio, she paused in front of a new framed photo. "Oh wow, I love this one. From your Oregon trip, right?" I stopped mid-step. My pulse ticked up. "That's the coast trip. Yeah." I moved closer, slowly. The picture was perfectly composed. Warm lighting, smiling faces, ocean in the background. Only, I wasn't in it. Maëlys leaned in. "Wait, weren't you the one who planned that whole thing?" "I was," I said, eyes fixed on the frame. "I booked the Airbnb, paid for the groceries, even drove the rental the whole weekend. Maybe you stepped away during this shot?" "No, I was standing right next to Elowen. She had just thrown the frisbee, and it hit the side of the cooler. I was laughing." Silence. The kind that made your ears ring. I guess I was cropped. That photo, hung in a hallway of curated history, was now a portrait of selected memory. I'd been there. But they decided I didn't need to be remembered. Or maybe they preferred the version of the story where I wasn't in it at all. That trip wasn't cheap either, I added, mostly to myself. Maëlys shifted uncomfortably, eyes scanning the floor. "Maybe it was just a mistake." I smiled without humor. "Mistakes don't get framed and mounted." She looked at me, really looked. "They really crossed a line last night, Ro." I shrugged. "There's no line to cross when you've already been erased." "I didn't know what to say," she whispered. "You said plenty by staying quiet." She didn't argue, just nodded slowly, her face tight with something like regret. When she left a little while later, I walked back down the hallway alone and stood in front of that photo again. The longer I stared at it, the more I felt like I was watching my own ghost. "Funny how you can disappear from your own story," I said softly. My phone buzzed. An alert from my bank. "Your scheduled transfer of $4,000 to Gordon and Valora has been completed." I stared at the screen. The transaction ID felt more like a receipt for being tolerated. My thumb hovered over the recurring payment setup. One tap would stop it. And for the first time in years, I hesitated. Not out of guilt, not from fear, but because something finally made sense. Sunday morning in that house moved like a clock that no longer told time, just repeated the same motions. I woke before the sun had fully risen, unsure if it was the stiffness of the guest bed or the tightness in my chest that broke my sleep. Either way, I found myself drifting toward the kitchen, the air thick with yesterday's quiet bruises. Valora was already up, of course. She stood at the counter, stirring her coffee with deliberate motions, as though trying to keep the spoon from making too much noise. She didn't glance up when I entered, didn't ask if I slept well. She just kept stirring, same rhythm, same silence. I made tea instead of coffee. It wasn't about taste. I just didn't want to ask where the sugar was. As I sipped and leaned against the counter, I remembered the alert on my phone from the night before. $4,000, transferred without hesitation. My thumb never hovered long over the cancel button. It wasn't guilt, not really. It was habit. And habit's a hell of a thing to unlearn, especially when it's built on a scaffolding of silence and obligation. The clink of a second cup hitting the counter made me glance over. Callista had entered, robe cinched tight, hair still wrapped in a towel. She looked too composed for someone who spent the night lobbing darts across a dinner table. "Morning," she said too lightly. "Mm-hmm." She poured coffee and leaned against the opposite counter, like we were in some kind of suburban sitcom kitchen scene, just two sisters chatting over breakfast. "You know," she started, sipping slowly, "you're really good at playing the misunderstood genius. Always just out of reach. Just eccentric enough to make us wonder what you're really up to." I didn't respond. She wasn't done. "But all you do is send money and expect parades. You drop in, drop cash, then disappear. It's curated." I blinked. Not at the insult, but at the gall. "Funny," I said, setting my mug down, coming from someone who asked for help 3 times during her divorce and never once said thank you. Her eyebrows lifted. "So now it's transactional? You gave money so you could keep a ledger." "No," I replied, "but it's convenient how quick you are to forget where your stability came from." Callista's tone sharpened. "People like you always think success makes you exempt from being decent, from showing up." There it was. Not anger, not disappointment. Envy, wearing a mask of moral high ground. Before I could answer, Valora entered the room. She didn't say a word, just walked to the island counter, picked up her mug, and tapped one polished fingernail against the ceramic. Tap, tap, tap. That sound. That same damn sound from every argument I wasn't allowed to win growing up. It wasn't yelling, it was control. Elegant, deliberate, and designed to shut down dissent. I looked between them, Callista still in performance mode, Valora with her silent gavel. It wasn't a conversation, it was a ritual, and I wasn't playing my part right. I picked up my tea and walked out. No dramatics, no speech, just the clink of my cup in the sink as I passed the faucet. Back in the guest room, I closed the door gently and sat at the desk. I took out a pen and wrote on hotel stationery. I am not obligated to keep supporting people who resent my existence. I underlined it. Twice. I opened my laptop, searched for my attorney's number, hovered over the contact form. My cursor blinked, waiting, like me. Not quite there, not yet. The day stretched on, quiet and brittle. I didn't speak to anyone, didn't need to. The script had already played out. Just before dinner prep began, my phone buzzed. A text from Callista. "Since you're here, can you spot Mom's meds this week? She's behind on refills." No greeting, no context, just another assumption dressed like a favor. I stared at the screen for a long moment. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake, and that was far more dangerous. The morning I left Boise, the air felt like wet cotton. Thick, clinging, and impossible to breathe through. I woke before dawn, the way you do before a difficult flight or a breakup you've rehearsed in your head for weeks. Except this wasn't rehearsal anymore. This was the final scene, and I was packing my suitcase with the kind of precision that comes only when you're done explaining yourself. As I folded the last blouse into place, I stared at the side table where my phone buzzed the night before. Callista's text still lit the screen. "Can you spot Mom's meds this week? She's behind on refills. No, thank you. No, sorry about last night. Just another expectation cloaked in convenience." They don't ask, they assume. And they always will, unless I end it. I opened my bank app. My fingers hovered for a split second over the recurring transfer tab. Then, without ceremony, I canceled the future payments. A soft click, confirmation message, and just like that, the umbilical cord they fed from snapped. People say money talks. Mine just said goodbye. I sat on the edge of the bed, took out a blank sheet of stationery, the nice kind I bought once and never used because my communication with them had never been about writing. I didn't write to explain. I wrote to end. The check I slid into the envelope was dated and labeled clearly, "Final." I tucked the note beside it. No long message, just the truth. If money defines my worth here, then let this be the last evidence of my existence. I left it on Valora's dresser. No dramatic placement, no attention-seeking. Just a quiet, irreversible decision. By the time I stepped outside with my luggage, Valora was trimming hedges in the backyard. She didn't hear the door shut, or maybe she did and chose not to turn around. I didn't call out to her. There was nothing left to say. I pressed my car key fob. The beep echoed off the driveway like punctuation. The drive to the airport was silent. I didn't play music. I didn't call anyone. I just let the miles pass under me, like chapters I was done rereading. 2 days later, back in Austin, I returned to my apartment with the kind of peace that comes from a decision that didn't beg for applause. I unpacked slowly, savoring the feeling of putting my things back where they belonged. Then came the voicemail. "Rowena, I don't know what this is about. Your mother's account just declined at the pharmacy. I assume it's a mistake?" Gordon's voice was calm, confused even, like the idea of consequences was something that happened to other people, never him. A few minutes later, another ping. "Callista, can you fix whatever glitch happened? Mom's card didn't go through at Elowen's school. This is important." No question marks, no check-in, just another expectation dressed up as urgency. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot of both messages and forwarded them to my attorney. Subject line: Dependency documented. Attached note: This is what manipulation looks like when it wears a family face. I closed the laptop and exhaled, not in relief, but in the space you feel when silence finally belongs to you. That afternoon, I picked up an old leather-bound journal I hadn't touched since my late 20s. Pages still crisp. I wrote on the first blank line, "Respect isn't a favor I'm asking. It's the interest on everything I already gave." Then I deleted the old family group thread from my phone. A knock broke the rhythm of my thoughts. It was Mylis standing at my door, her expression somewhere between nervous and resolute. She held a folded printout in her hand. "You need to see what Callista's planning," she said, stepping inside. I'd hoped cutting the money would be the end. But some people don't retreat, they retaliate. When Mylis handed me the printout, I didn't say anything. I just read the email once, then again. Each line scorched in quiet disbelief. The header was clear, forwarded accidentally from Callista to her husband, but originally addressed to our parents. "If Rowena tries anything legal," it read, "we all need to be on the same page. Frame it as concern for her mental state. Play the instability angle. If we stay unified, her narrative won't stick." I folded the paper in half and placed it on the table. "You okay?" Mylis asked softly. I nodded. That was all. No visible anger, no sharp inhale. just a cold stillness that slid into place like armor. You don't fight lies with noise. You fight them with records. The next morning, I woke up in Austin, sunlight pouring over a city that didn't try to minimize me. I made coffee and sat down at my desk. My phone blinked with a voicemail notification. I listened. Valora's voice wavered between grief and guilt, but it never reached apology. "Rowena," she started, "I don't know what you're doing anymore. Your father's not sleeping. He's stressed, and I'm—" She choked back a sniffle. "I'm scared you're trying to hurt this family just to prove a point." I hit rewind, played that part again. "We were surviving just fine before you made everything about you." There it was. The confession. Survival. On my name. On my silence. On my money. I opened my email, attached the audio file, and sent it to my lawyer. No long explanation, just a note. Pattern of manipulation confirmed. And for once, I replied directly to Valora. Short, clean. "You were surviving fine. On my name. On my money. That ends now." I didn't wait for her response. Later that week, a call came in from Melis. "You're going to want to hear this," she said, her voice tight. Callista had driven over to Valora's house. According to Melis, who'd stopped by at the worst possible time, or maybe the best, an argument broke out in the kitchen. Valora had brought out a folder Rowena had sent over months ago. Receipts, bank statements, documents outlining every payment she'd made for the house, for Elowyn's medical expenses, for Callista's emergency rent. Callista grabbed the folder, flipped through it with a sneer, and said, "She wants to play victim? Let her do it without props." Then she shredded the papers, page by page, feeding them into the machine like kindling. Valora didn't stop her. Gordon walked out of the room without saying a word. Later, Melis found Valora sitting alone at the kitchen table, trying to tape the pieces back together. Regret comes in whispers, but pride roars louder. That night, I opened a folder on my computer and began compiling my own version of truth. Digital this time. Screenshots, transaction logs, email chains, timestamps, labels. I titled it, Proof of Absence and Contribution. I didn't plan to use it, not yet, but I was done letting lies live unchallenged. The next morning, as I was scanning the final PDFs, another message slid into my inbox. A group email thread. Callista had forwarded it to the entire extended family, cousins, aunts, even Dad's old business partner. Subject line, Concerning Behavior from Rowena. "Lately she's been erratic," she wrote, "withdrawing support, threatening action. I just wanted to keep everyone informed. If she reaches out to you, be cautious." No one replied. Not then. But they saw it. My hand hovered over the Reply All button. I didn't reply. Not yet. I had something better than words, a plan. I sat at my desk in Austin with the email spread across the screen like an autopsy report. Every word clinical, calculated, devastating. The printout Melis brought was damning enough, but the full chain made it surgical. Callista hadn't just whispered about me behind closed doors. She had been systematically feeding narratives to our family tree, branch by branch, word by word, framing me as unstable, erratic, and possibly dealing with something undiagnosed. The subject line said it all. If she tries anything, here's our side. It wasn't slander, it was strategy. And for the first time, I realized how many years of my silence had helped them build their case, using my absence, my privacy, my refusal to stoop as evidence of guilt. I kept scrolling, line after line, phrases like emotional imbalance, tends to rewrite history, and the pièce de résistance. She's always been different, aloof. It's not malicious, it's delusional. It was stunning in its clarity, a full-blown smear campaign dressed in polite concern. And I had receipts. Funny how trauma comes in flashes. One moment you're staring at a screen, and the next, you're back in a lawn chair with a plastic plate in your lap and the sound of grilled corn crackling in the background. Last summer. Family barbecue. I'd stepped behind the garage for a moment of air, but their voices carried. "She doesn't belong here," Callista whispered to Simeon. "She's not one of us. People like her need distance so they can feel superior." He didn't argue. He just grunted. Complicity in a single sound. It wasn't the first time. Callista had a gift for making cruelty sound like commentary. "You never call. You only show up when you need something. You're always so intense." I used to think it was just her way. But now, looking at the trail of emails, I saw it for what it was, a campaign. And I wasn't just the target. I was the enemy. I rubbed my temples, took a breath, and opened the second folder Malis had left on my desk. "This one's worse," she'd said quietly. It was. A property deed. Caldwell County. A duplex I had purchased 7 years ago, originally under my name, set up as an investment, temporarily held in trust for family security. I remembered the conversation, Valora's voice like syrup, saying, "Just until we get through this rough patch." The deed had been transferred, quietly, legally, and without my consent, from my name to Simeon's. Signed by Gordon and Valora. No notification, no discussion, just erased. I stared at the document for several minutes, not in disbelief, in calculation. "It was never just about dismissing me," I whispered. "It was about consuming me quietly." I called my attorney, forwarded the documents, requested a title audit. No fire, no fight, just the click of a send button. That evening, I poured a glass of wine, not to unwind, but to mark the beginning of the next move. I opened a blank folder on my desktop and labeled it Mirror File. Not a case. Not yet. Just a reflection. I began dragging in screenshots, emails, payment confirmations, texts, audio clips. Every time I'd shown up, supported, stayed quiet. I wasn't building a case. I was building a mirror, to show them who they were when they thought I wasn't watching. Then, right before bed, I opened my phone and saw it. Callista had posted a new photo. She stood next to Valora in the backyard, arms linked, both smiling beneath string lights. The caption read, "Family first, always, even when some forget." I took a screenshot. Then I opened a new folder. Evidence. Public. I didn't want revenge, but I wasn't going to let them write my obituary while I was still breathing. The group text came on a Thursday. No greeting, no context. Just Valora's clipped message. "Gordon's birthday dinner, Sunday. Feel free to drop by. Bring something sweet. Allowan loves your desserts." It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Passive, implied, deliberately vague. I stared at the words for a while, rereading drop by like it was a spare key to a home I no longer lived in. No one asked if I was available. No one said they wanted me there. I wasn't a guest. I was a convenience. Sunday came with the same gray skies Boise always saved for moments like this. I arrived just before 6, holding a plain white bakery box with a lemon chiffon cake inside, the one Allowan always asked for. I stepped into the backyard where the string lights flickered and folding chairs dotted the lawn in neat rows. Everyone was already seated, no extra chair, not even a folding stool. Valora saw me from across the yard. She lifted a hand halfway, smiled like a neighbor you nod at but never speak to. "Glad you could drop in," she called out. "You can leave the cake on the sideboard." Callista followed it up with, "You didn't have to come. We figured you'd be busy proving a point somewhere." The point, I thought, had already been proven, just not the one they were pretending to see. I didn't respond. I walked through the patio door, into the kitchen, placed the box quietly where instructed, and stepped out into the hallway. I passed photos again. Callista's wedding, Gordon's fishing trips, Elowan's birthday banners. Still no trace of me. It was the same erasure, rehearsed and perfected. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope I had prepared. No shaking hands, no rush of adrenaline, just resolve. I walked back outside and placed the envelope next to the stack of birthday cards by the grill. Valora spotted it. "What's this?" she asked, casual but with that clipped edge of control she couldn't quite hide. "A gift," I said evenly. "The last one I'll ever give here." I turned to leave, but Valora, of course, couldn't let the exit be mine. She picked up the envelope and, with deliberate theater, opened it and began to read aloud. "To the family who took my presents as burden and my money as entitlement." Every voice died. The scrape of forks against paper plates stopped. Silence fell over the backyard like a thunderclap. She read the rest slowly, each word sliding like ice over stone. The letter outlined the financial contributions I'd made over the past years. The rent, the tuition, the medical bills. It listed what had been said behind my back, including exact quotes. It closed with one line: "I am not withdrawing because I was hurt. I'm withdrawing because I refuse to keep showing up for people who resent me for it." Callista tried to interrupt. "This isn't the time." But I turned to face them, voice stronger than I'd ever allowed in that space. "You wanted to erase me in private, so I withdrew in public." Gordon stood but said nothing. His mouth opened, then closed, like a man unaccustomed to being speechless. Eloan stared at me, wide-eyed, her fork frozen halfway to her lips. Malis blinked fast, stunned. Valora said nothing. She just tore the letter in half, slowly, like she was handling trash. I didn't flinch. I walked out, chin high, shoulders square. Each step echoed against the tile of the patio, a sound more final than applause ever could have been. Outside, the air was cooler. I paused on the sidewalk, letting the breeze press against my skin. My phone buzzed. A message from my lawyer. Title audit confirmed. Property was transferred illegally. I didn't smile because I was pleased. I smiled because it finally made sense. The birthday party ended with cake. The aftermath would begin with court. The morning after the party, I sat at my desk in Austin, scrolling through a flood of emails. Some were empty subject lines from people unsure what to say. Others were acidic, wrapped in politeness so thin it was almost satire. Most were just quiet. Too quiet. I hadn't heard a word from Valora or Gordon. Not a call, not a text. Just the soundless void of people regrouping behind closed doors. Callista, of course, had taken the predictable route. She posted one of her classic, vague online quotes. "When people show their true colors, believe them." I read it 3 times. Not out of shock, but curiosity. I wondered how it felt to perform innocence with such conviction. Then I closed my browser and opened my notebook. They didn't flinch. They regrouped. A ping from Milas came mid-morning. No greeting, just an image. A snapshot of the seating chart from the party. I recognized the handwriting, Valora's neat script, the way she curls the tail of every Y. Rowena, not listed. Every other name was present, assigned with care, even +1s. And on the back, scrawled in red ink. "If she shows, just smile." I stared at the note, my jaw tense. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd planned for my exclusion. There's a special kind of cruelty in pretending you forgot someone you deliberately erased. Later that day, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something about the number made me pick up. "Rowena, this is Sharon Delaney. I hope it's all right I called." Mrs. Delaney had lived next door to my parents for as long as I could remember. She used to bring over pumpkin bread during the holidays, always with a bow that looked machine-tied. "I've been meaning to say something. It's probably not my place, but I thought you should know." I waited. "Your mother's been telling people for years that you've been unstable, that you don't come around because you're ashamed of who you turned into. She said you didn't like being seen after your breakdown." There it was. The rewritten story, polished and distributed. I didn't correct her. I just thanked her calmly and hung up. The narrative wasn't just inside the family. It had roots down the block. It had spread through fences and porches, through whispered condolences and raised eyebrows at neighborhood gatherings. I wasn't just being edited. I was being rewritten. I opened my file labeled Statements. Added a line, Sharon Delaney, verbal account, October 23rd. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and stared at a blank document. The cursor blinked like it was daring me to finally speak. I began to write. Not for court, not for Valora, not for the cousins who'd quietly watched from the sidelines. This was for me. Title: What They Said, What I Lived. The words came slowly at first, then all at once. I wrote about the birthday party, the envelopes, the fake concern, the absences, and the gaslighting dressed as etiquette. I didn't embellish, I didn't exaggerate, I just wrote what had happened. Not to expose them, but to reclaim the version where I existed. I wasn't sure if I would ever share it publicly, but as the final sentence landed on the page, something inside me settled. Just as I closed my laptop, a new email arrived. The subject line made my breath pause. Notice of preliminary hearing. Property title fraud. I clicked it open. The sender. The county clerk's office. It was real. Formal. The first step in a process that could not be silenced with a Facebook quote or torn up at a barbecue. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. So they want to play legal? Let's play fair. They thought I wouldn't fight. They forgot I built empires from blueprints. Now I'm building my case. The courthouse in Austin didn't smell like justice. It smelled like old paper, recycled air, and a faint trace of anxiety that clung to people's collars like smoke. I sat across from my attorney in a windowless conference room, title fraud documents spread between us like a map of betrayal. He read through the papers calmly, pen tapping rhythmically against a legal pad. I didn't need to read them again. I knew what they said. I knew what they meant. "This is clean," he finally said. "They transferred property you legally owned without your knowledge or consent. And thanks to the contract you signed back then, they never had that right." The contract. I'd nearly forgotten about it. 6 years ago, Valora had cornered me during one of my brief visits. "If anything happens to your father," she'd said, holding a mug of tea like it contained secrets, "this protects us. Just sign, Rowena, don't make it a thing." And I did. Because back then, family still felt like something to protect. Now that same signature would become their undoing. I never lost power, I thought. I just forgot to wield it. That night, I returned home and found a new voice message waiting on my phone. Valora's name flashed on the screen. I listened with the speaker pressed against my knee. "Rowena," she began, already crying. "I don't know what's happening to you, but your father's heart can't take much more. If you push this in court, if you humiliate us publicly, you could be killing him." She paused. Then came the dagger, wrapped in velvet. "You were always the dramatic one, but now you're dangerous." I didn't react, not outwardly. But inside, something that had been clinging to the edges of guilt slipped loose and fell away. They taught me that love was measured in sacrifice. Turns out, I was always the only one bleeding. I opened the voice recorder app on my phone, hit record, spoke calmly, clearly. "What's killing you isn't me. It's your own entitlement." Then I saved the file and dragged it into my legal folder. I didn't send it. I didn't need to. My truth didn't need to be heard to be powerful. It just needed to be proven. The following afternoon, my attorney sent over a new document. This time, not a contract, but a screenshot. A group chat. 3 participants: Gordon, Callista, Simeon. The text from Callista read, "We need to be aligned before the hearing. No emotional outbursts, no apologies. Frame her as combative. If we stick to the plan, she'll fold." I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing a reply to my lawyer. "Let's prepare coordinated truth." The trial hadn't started yet, but the verdict was already unfolding in their choices. The mediation room inside the Boise County Courthouse was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in tone. Fluorescent lights hummed above the beige table, and every creak of the leather chairs felt amplified in the stillness. Valora and Gordon sat on one side, their attorney between them like a human firewall. Callista was in the corner, saying nothing, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the wall like she wasn't really here. I took my seat across from them. No handshakes, no nods. Just silence and paperwork. They showed up in coordinated beige. I showed up with boundaries. The judge, a tired-looking man with silver-rimmed glasses and a voice like warm asphalt, cleared his throat and introduced the terms. The proposal, their lawyer began, unfolding a crisp document, is that Ms. Rowena will regain ownership of the Caldwell property. In addition, she'll receive compensation for emotional damages and legal fees in exchange for dropping all further claims. I didn't let him finish. I'm not here for land or damages, I said calmly. I'm here to make it official. I want nothing under this name again. A beat of silence. The air cracked. Gordon leaned forward. You're throwing away your birthright. I met his eyes, steady. You already threw me away, I replied. I'm just catching up. Valora opened her mouth, closed it again. The judge looked between us. Ms. Rowena, just to confirm, you're waiving all rights to inheritance, real property, and familial assets? Yes, I said. In exchange for a formal admission that my name was used in violation of the agreement I signed, and that I was never informed of the transfer. Their lawyer adjusted his tie. We can prepare that letter. I nodded. Then I signed the release form with a pen I brought from home. The same one I'd used to sign over the property years ago. Full circle. This wasn't surrender. This was liberation. Back in Austin, the air felt different. Not cleaner, just honest. I sat at my kitchen counter that evening, rereading the first paragraph of my personal essay. The title had changed. It was now The Cost of Love Without Witnesses. I didn't write it for revenge. I wrote it so I wouldn't forget. My lease dropped by 2 days later with a bouquet of white tulips and a bag of fresh peaches. You did what most people only dream of, she said, placing them on my counter. You stood your ground and didn't look back. I smiled and offered her coffee. We didn't talk about Valora or Gordon or the case. We didn't need to. That night, I received a voice message from Elowen. You're still my favorite grown-up, she said. Mom says that makes me dramatic too. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. Then let her call us that. I whispered to the empty room. The dramatic ones tend to survive. Later, I opened my cloud drive. I scrolled past the folder labeled Family Archive. Pictures curated, arranged, approved. I deleted it. Then I created a new folder. Me, unedited. I uploaded photos from recent travels, clients I was proud of, journal pages scanned by hand, no filters, no captions, just my story, as I lived it. An email pinged. Subject, settlement posted. Formal statement from family has been received. It's done. I closed the laptop, walked to the window, and looked out at the evening sky. I took a deep breath. This one didn't ache. I didn't win. I walked away. And for the first time, it didn't feel like loss. It arrived late in the afternoon, the envelope small and hand-addressed. No return label, no postage. It had been slipped through the front gate, no fanfare, just paper and ink. I opened it slowly, sitting on the back patio, a soft wind teasing the corner of the letter. It was from Elowen. I know what they did, it began. I'm sorry they did it to you. I see you, even if they never did. The handwriting was slightly uneven, like she'd written it in one sitting. No drafts, no edits. Every word was raw. She didn't hedge. She didn't make excuses for them. She didn't ask me to forgive. She simply told the truth. Mom says I should be loyal to family, but you're the only one who never lied to me. You always told me the hard stuff straight. And even when they mocked you, you never did that to me. I sat with that letter for a long time, not crying, not shaking, just breathing, letting the words land where so much damage had been. She'd seen the arguments, heard the phone calls, read the messages. She knew. Sometimes justice doesn't walk in wearing a robe. Sometimes it arrives in the penmanship of a child who refuses to forget. For the first time in years, I wrote back. A real letter by hand. It wasn't long. I didn't try to explain everything. I just told her one thing. I never stopped showing up for you. Even when they tried to erase me, I remembered you. I sealed it, placed it in an envelope, and walked it to the mailbox myself. A new legacy begins. Not of assets, not of inheritance, but of truth-telling. That evening, I opened my laptop and stared at the document I'd been shaping for months. The cost of love without witnesses. I hit publish. No announcement, no warning, just truth, set free into the world. Within hours, the essay began circulating. A friend from grad school shared it. Then a journalist in a women's advocacy group. Then a podcast reached out. By the end of the week, my inbox was full. The piece didn't name names. It didn't accuse. It documented. Malis texted. This was power, not pettiness. My old boss sent an email. I had no idea. You carried it like armor. Gordon and Valora? Silence. Callista posted an Instagram story with a black screen and the words, "Some people would burn down the house for a headline." No names, just smoke. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. A week later, I stopped by a local bookstore. I wasn't expecting to see it, but there it was. My memoir, on a shelf, under new releases. Not self-published, proper spine, ISBN and all. I pulled a copy down, read the back cover. The blurb was clean, simple, a memoir about memory, inheritance, and the price of being the only honest person in the room. I smiled and placed it back. A young woman nearby picked it up. She turned it over in her hands, like it was something she needed. Maybe she'll see herself in those pages and rewrite the ending sooner than I did. I stepped outside. The air smelled like fresh paper and eucalyptus from the shop's front planter. I didn't burn bridges, I built exits, and this was the last door I needed to close.